Good Lord, this is a big place. And a lot of empty seats. Let's do something about that. You people in the back, would you please go out and each one seize one? Well, that might not be practical. This is Noreascon 2. The 38th World Science Fiction Convention. Sometimes I feel as though it's the 380th and that I've been to all of them today. But Noreascon 2, the successor to one of the legendary conventions, one of the great jeweled movement, perfectly choreographed conventions of antiquity. How many of you were at Noreascon 1? Oh, look at those hands go up. You came back for more of it. Oh, I don't blame you. A member of the Noreascon 1 committee came up to me this morning and said in tones of wonder, yesterday we already had more people on hand than attended all of Noreascon 1. That was a big convention. We are tonight going to let you meet our guests of honor. We've got them out of their cages. Before we do this, we have various routine and non-routine events to take place. Firstly, is there demand for a signing for those with impaired hearing at this event? Because if so, those who wish signing should come up front where we have our man with the fast hands. Many of you I perceive heard what I said. That's always comforting too. We have an entire bundle of other announcements to make, not the usual announcements that I often make whenever a microphone is in my hand. These are all the real thing. And to make them, who better? The chairman. Notice he said chairman, marking him as a person of the old world. The chairman of Noreascon 2, Leslie Turek.
Thank you. Welcome to Noreascon 2. As Bob mentioned, there was a Worldcon in Boston in 1971. I was a fan back then, but I never joined the Noreascon committee officially because I thought that putting on a con for 1,600 people was a really crazy thing to try to do. Of course, you know how these things go. I ended up getting corralled into helping out at the con, full time. So when the idea of another Worldcon bid came up in, I don't remember, 74 or 75, I had what I thought was a better idea. This time, I'd join the committee, and then when the bidding deadline approached, I would make an eloquent speech pointing out what an impossible task it would be and how crazy we would be to take it on. As you can see, a lot of good it did me. But in the past years, and especially in the past couple of days, I've discovered that it isn't really an impossible task. And the reason for this is the many, many people, fans, from all over the world, and maybe the universe from some of the people I've seen wandering around, who have pitched in to make this convention a success, I hope. To give a brief commercial, even though things might appear to be running smoothly, we're still very short of help in some areas. And a lot of people have had to work overtime to keep things going. If you've been enjoying yourself, maybe you can find a few hours to help out and make the convention good for everyone. There are already more than 300 staff people who are working at least 4 hours a day, and hundreds more helpers working anywhere from 2 hours to round the clock. It's okay, I'm not going to introduce them all to you. But I do want to thank each of them most sincerely for making this convention as good as it can possibly be. I know that everyone on the committee joins me in welcoming all of you to Noreascon 2, and we hope that you have a wonderful time while you're here. Thank you very much.
Well, maybe things aren't running as smoothly as I thought, because here at this introduction ceremony, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Silverberg. And it has fallen to me to make known to you the guests of honor tonight. This is a job that has fallen to me often in the past, and I found it diabolically difficult each time that I've had to do it, because though I am myself the essence of sweetness and light, there's a certain dry, wry sharpness to my approach to humor. And the people I'm asked to introduce are invariably saintly. This is taxing. This brings me to the borders of good taste frequently and deposits me on the far side without a passport. The first time I had to introduce a guest of honor, it was Philip Jose Farmer, who, although he's an author of scurrilous fiction, is himself in person a gentle, noble, soft-spoken, completely lovable man. I was really hard-pressed to do a proper job on him. The next time around was even worse. Cliff Simak. Who can be nicer, sweeter than Cliff Simak, the professional guest of honor at Noreascon 1? What can you say about Cliff Simak that's nasty? I found a little. On the same program was the fan guest of honor, the benevolent Harry Warner Jr. That was difficult. The fan guest of honor this year is Bruce Pells. Now, he's satanic. I don't get to introduce him. At the Miami Convention of Blessed Memory and Sainted Humidity, I was told to introduce Jack Williamson. From Simak to Williamson is not an enormous leap in saintliness. One doesn't joke around with Jack Williamson, dear old Jack. I did. Well, here I am doing it again, and fortunately, this year they've allowed me Damon Knight. Damon. Sit down, Damon. We have a little way to go. Damon was once a fan. Did you know that Damon Knight was a grubby, purple-fingered fan who put out a hectographed fanzine called Snide? Williamson never published a magazine called Snide. Simak doesn't even know what snide means. Damon published Snide, founded the National Fantasy Fan Federation. Did you know that? Do you even know what the National Fantasy Fan Federation is? Ask him. On Saturday, I must tell you, Saturday between 1 and 2 in Heinz 200, wherever in this edifice that may be, there will be the Damon and Kate show, an informal question and answer time. And at that time, I want several of you to ask Damon about the intimate role that he played in the midwifing of the National Fantasy Fan Federation. questions for the Damon and Kate show, it says here, and I do what I'm told up here, should be submitted to the question box outside the Jefferson Room. You all know where the Jefferson Room is. It's that way. Damon went on from publishing Snide to writing book reviews. Not a great leap. From there to writing fiction, editing magazines, growing a long beard, and doing a lot of other interesting stuff which you can read about in the program book. I will summarize a little of it for the benefit of you who need your program books signed. He was born in Painesville, Ohio in 1893. Attended Ohio State, Boston University, Coos Bay Prep, Southern Methodist University, and the Holy Names Academy of Grants Pass, Oregon, from which he was expelled with high honors in 1912. Prior to founding the National Fantasy Fan Federation, he was an honorary associate member of the Women's Christian Temperance Union. Subsequently saw the error of his ways and opened a saloon in Tijuana, where he was the host of the 1932 Worldcon, which took place at a small bordello just outside Ensenada. That was where Harlan Ellison was conceived. Damon took no part in that. By choice. He may be snide, but he ain't dumb. As a book reviewer, he distinguished himself so well that he was forced to spend the years from 1946 to 1957 in San Marino, a small republic in Italy on top of a mountain. After careful negotiations, he descended and founded the Science Fiction Writers of America. If you don't know what that is, ask him tomorrow at the Damon and Kate show. He is, to deviate into reality for a moment, a profoundly important figure in our funny little field, whose canonization as guest of honor is long overdue, as is true of most of these things. He has been an editor, a writer, a critic, and most significantly, I think, the conscience of a whole generation of writers. I will speak from personal experience here, because just about the time I was learning how to write, he was writing all those ungodly, terrifying book reviews. And I lived then, and do now, boy and man, with the sense of Damon Knight looking over my shoulder as I type, saying, "That's dumb, Bob." I'm not the only one. I carry with me, at whatever desk I sit, that sense of a presence looking down, snidely, infuriatingly, accurately, filtering out all that is fraudulent, all that is foolish, all that is the easy answer to the hard question, scooping all that stuff up, holding it up for inspection, gently but ferociously. He once made me do 5 rewrites of a short story. It was a very short story, and I redid it completely 5 times, getting angrier and angrier. But I did it because he had me wiggling on the hook. I didn't believe it was necessary to do those 5 rewrites. I only began believing it after the 5th version won a nebula. He was then, and will always remain, unfortunately, and to my cosmic irritation, that figure saying, dumb. And he will for those of you who are writers and want to become writers, by direct or indirect presence, play the same role for you, whether you like it or not. Damon Knight.
Some of that was true. Now that I've got you all here, I'm going to tell you the story of my life with emphasis on the foolish parts. And this means that I have to begin by telling you something about the state of Oregon. By the way, that's the way you pronounce it, Oregon. Only foreigners say Oregon, okay? Let's hear it. Oregon. Okay. Now, in order to save a little time, I'm not going to tell you anything that is not true. I'm not going to tell you, for instance, that in the summer, instead of tanning, we rust. Or that we have to sweep up the moss in the winter. These are just propaganda efforts. We're trying to keep people out of Oregon so that they won't clutter up the landscape. And in fact, I'll tell you in confidence, there is a good deal to be said for Oregon. If you like scenery or pure air and water and friendly people, that kind of thing, it's okay. But at the time that I was growing up in Hood River, Oregon, I must tell you that the place was at a cultural ebb. In all the time that I lived in Hood River, Oregon, I could not find anyone to talk to. And I was there until I was 18. I'll give you a couple of examples of not finding people to talk to. When I was a kid, a new comic strip came out in the Sunday papers called Flash Gordon. And I thought this was kind of keen, but I was regretful that they had made one silly little mistake. When Flash and his fellow astronauts got to Mongo, they found that everybody on that planet spoke English. And I mentioned this to a contemporary of mine, a kid my own age, and I said, why should they speak English? And he said, what else would they speak? Second example, the movie version of The Wizard of Oz delighted me, but I really wished they had not done that last section back in Kansas in sepia, which showed that the whole thing was a dream. And I mentioned this to my aunt, who had just seen the picture, and she said, well, what else could it have been? These things left me simply slack-jawed. I didn't know how to respond to that. And so, having nobody to talk to, of course, I read a lot of books, beginning with fantasy. I read every fairy tale book in the Hood River Public Library, and by chance, I think they had a complete collection of the Grimm brothers' fairy tales, and Hans Christian Andersen, and all the rest. I read hundreds of fairy tales. And there were two that stuck in my mind, particularly, so much so that I've remembered them to this day, and they're not the popular ones, but maybe some of you have read them. One is called The 12 Dancing Princesses. Aha! Fantastic! I thought I was the only one. Well, for the benefit of those who are not applauding, I'm going to tell you the plot of The 12 Dancing Princesses. This concerns a king who has 12 beautiful daughters whom he keeps locked up in their bedroom at night, in spite of which, in the morning, it is always found that they have danced their shoes into holes. And, of course, he offers half his kingdom and the choice of princesses to anyone who will discover the secret. And naturally, the first two young men who try this fall asleep instead and are beheaded. And the third young man, who is a poor young fellow who has been instructed by an old woman he met on the road, instead of drinking the drugged wine the princesses offer him, lets it dribble into a sponge which he has concealed under his chin. and pretends to go to sleep and snores. And as he watches, he sees that the 12 princesses go to one of the beds, lift it up, and disclose a passage under the ground, and down they go. And he follows them into a world below the earth. It's not a cavern. It's a world. It's got forests, trees. There's a lake with an island on it, and on the island is a pavilion, and that's where the 12 princesses dance all night with their enchanted princes. Now, the second one is a story called Mother Hulda. Again, I can't believe this. I should have brought you some hard ones. In Mother Hulda, a young woman drops her spindle into a well, and in trying to retrieve it, she bends over too far, falls in, loses consciousness, and wakes up again in a world that's under the earth somewhere. There are apple orchards, and there's a house, and here's old Mother Hulda. And in my edition, there's a footnote that explains that this refers to a folk belief that when it snows, that's Mother Hulda shaking her feather bed. And this is a little peculiar when you reflect that they got there down a well. So the idea of another fascinating world somewhere, I didn't really care where, and the very ambiguousness of the location was attractive to me. Reached by falling down a well or going through a magic door in a dream or through a wardrobe, I didn't care. This excited my imagination. And I found this theme not only in fantasy but in science fiction, which I'll come to in a moment. When I was about 11, I did finally discover a science fiction magazine. The first issue that I ever saw was the August-September 1933 issue of Amazing Stories, which featured on its cover a story called, are you ready for this? The Meteor Men of Plaa. P-L-A-A, Plaa. Now this concerned two aviators who land on the Heaviside layer. I swear, they land on the Heaviside layer, which is a layer of cloud, kind of spongy, like a carpet with an inch of foam rubber under it, but you can walk around on it. And this is Plaa, and it's inhabited by some little wogs who make everything they need out of cloud, chocolate malteds or shoes or whatever it is. And the climax of the story is when the wogs attack the aviators, and just before they get back into the airplane, one of them fires a Very pistol and sets the Heaviside layer on fire. And the little wogs fall flaming to the earth. That's the title, The Meteor Men of Plaa. Okay? Now, after I discovered science fiction, I found that I liked it better than fairy tales, better than fantasy. And at first I thought the reason was that I could believe in the science fiction. But obviously this was wrong. The fact was that I did believe in the science fiction. I believed in the Meteor Men of Plaa, and I believed in the marvelous world of the year 2000. I used to sit around for hours trying to figure out if I could ever get there. And I believed in the marvelous cities of the future where we would all have our own helicopters or flying belts, and there would be spiral pathways around the skyscrapers and all that stuff. I believed that. But that was because I believed everything. For instance, I read Peter Pan, and I was really entranced by the idea of flying. I didn't want to do it in an airplane. I wanted to fly. And I was about 7, I guess. And I thought I could probably do this if I just jumped off the ground, and then before I had time to fall back, jumped again. And I tried this repeatedly. Never could jump the second time fast enough. And when I told this to my son Jonathan, who was then about 9, he fell on the floor laughing. I also read the Mars books by Edgar Rice Burroughs, and if you've read these books, you know that John Carter did not get to Mars in a spaceship. The way he did it was to walk outdoors on a starry night and look up at the red spark of Mars in the sky and raise his arms in supplication and just express his yearning, and then there would be an instant of interplanetary cold, and he would find himself standing on the sward of the Dead Sea bottom, flexing his thews. In Edgar Rice Burroughs' books, there's no grass and there are no mussels, only sward and thews. But I didn't know this was funny. I wanted to go there, and I figured if he could do it, maybe I could too. If I had succeeded, I would have had a hell of a shock, probably, because either I would have arrived on the astronomical Mars, where I would have asphyxiated in about a minute and a half and frozen solid shortly thereafter, or I suppose I could have arrived on Barsoom, where I would have been trampled to death by thoats, didn't have any thews. As you know, science fiction magazines were invented by a man named Hugo Gernsback, who came to this country at the age of 14. Let's hear it for Hugo. Why not? And we honor him by the name of the Hugo Awards. Well, I don't think that's not enough. We ought to build a 50-foot statue out of old pulp magazines. Gernsback was not only the first science fiction publisher and editor, but as far as I can make out, he was the first propagandist for spaceflight and the first futurist. I'm not sure everybody knows that. He really believed that he was pushing the world of the future, not just fairy tales at all. That wasn't where it was at for Hugo. He believed that these were the stories about the world to come, and that he was training a generation or two generations of people who would bring this world about. However, he lost Amazing Stories fairly rapidly in one of his several bankruptcies, and it was taken over by a company in Chicago and then edited by a man named T. O'Connor Sloan, who had been one of Gernsback's editors, and who was then a man in his 80s with a beard which I am reliably assured was longer than mine. And T. O'Connor Sloan, although he was himself a scientist, he was a chemist, did not believe in spaceflight and said so several times in print. And to him, science fiction was indeed fairy tales. He was the one who published The Meteor Men of Pla. You may not be aware that the first guest of honor of a World Science Fiction Convention was not a writer, not an editor, but an artist, an illustrator, Frank R. Paul. Here it's for Paul. And this is perfectly logical when you think what Paul did. He did hundreds of these just immensely detailed cover paintings, which were almost stories in themselves. And they were hard-edged, and they were carefully thought out, and they were just full of goodies. But Frank R. Paul was not T. O'Connor Sloan's favorite illustrator. The illustrator he liked was a man named Leo Morey, who had a few defects as an illustrator. He could not draw a straight line. His human figures always had one leg shorter than the other, and so on. He liked muddy grays and blues and greens, and it was yuck. But there's a story. The reason I'm telling you this is I want to tell you the story about T. O'Connor Sloan and Leo Morey. Morey comes into the office with a cover painting which shows a planet up here and a spaceship rocketing down toward this corner. And Sloan looked at it and said, "No, Leo, that's wrong. The planet should be up down here in the corner, and the rocket ship going up this way." And Morey said, "Well, all right." And he took the painting away and stood it in the corner of his studio for 3 or 4 days. And then he brought it back into the office and turned it upside down. And Sloan said, "That's fine, Morey. That's the way you should have done it in the first place." We were all a little crazy in those days. And when people said to you then, where do you get your crazy ideas?" They weren't kidding. I'm going to tell you another story. I'm not going to reveal the name of the writer involved because, although I think he wouldn't mind, I'm not sure, and I haven't asked his permission, so we'll call him John Doe. But this is a more or less true story. John Doe was one of the early science fiction writers. And there came a time in the 30s when he had a little psychological problem. He wanted to go to a psychiatrist and see if he could get it straightened out. And in their first interview, the psychiatrist said, "Well, Mr. Doe, tell me, what do you do for a living? What is your occupation?" And Doe said, I'm a science fiction writer. science fiction? What is that? And John Doe said, well, I write stories about robots and Martians and death rays and things like that. And the psychiatrist said, well, we'll soon cure you of that. So there I was in Hood River, Oregon, reading science fiction magazines, still nobody to talk to. And besides that, I was terminally unattractive. I had a funny haircut and tortoiseshell glasses, and my sweaters were unraveled. And when I was in high school, Fred Pohl saved my life. I confess to you that he didn't know he was doing this, and that if he had known it, he might have had second thoughts. But what he did, Fred at that time was publishing two magazines called Astonishing and Super Science. And because his budget was so small, he not only had to buy stories from his friends at half a cent a word, but he had to fill holes in the magazines by writing things himself that didn't cost anything, such as fanzine reviews. And by reading these magazines, I discovered that there were such things as fanzines, and I wrote away for some and began to contribute little drawings and stories to them. And in my junior year or senior year in high school, I published a fanzine of my own called Snide, and this drew me to the attention of the Futurians in New York, and they invited me to come to New York and be a Futurian. So I met them at the Denver Convention, the Denvention, in 1941, which I think was the third World Convention. And we got into a car and drove to New York, and there I was a Futurian, and I had somebody to talk to. Donald A. Walheim said I was a mollusk. John Michel said I was the floating kidney of the science fiction movement. And Fred Pohl called me a pustulant white, but at least they were talking to me. That Denver convention, I don't remember how many people were there, but it must have been at least 250. And do you know how many staff people we have here this year? It's 300. By the way, have you read that incredible contract with the city of Boston for the use of Heinz Auditorium? We can't bring a balloon in here. We cannot bring in any animal, reptile, bird, or fish. And we cannot put any nail, tack, or screw into Heinz Auditorium or any part thereof. Can you imagine how much trouble I could cause just by bringing in a reptile suspended from a balloon and giving him a hammer and a nail? In 1943, Fred Pohl changed my life again, and this time he did it on purpose, I think. He found out there was an opening for an assistant editor at Popular Publications, and he told me about it and lent me a white shirt to apply for the job in. He never saw that shirt again, but I got the job. They paid me $25 a week, and I did all the donkey work on various pulp magazines. This was the heyday of the pulps, the early 40s. Popular at that time had about 40 pulp magazines of all kinds. They had detectives, westerns, mysteries, occult horror, love stories, sports fiction pulps. And this was the greatest possible education for me. I really believe that I learned to write by watching how the pros did it and how the amateurs did it, because I had to read the slush pile. And if you do that for a year and read what goes into the magazines and what's rejected, it gives you an instinctive feeling for what you can and can't get away with. However, there were certain trials involved in this job. When I was first there, I worked in the department of an editor named Alden H. Norton. One of his magazines was G8 and his Battle Aces. Oh, I know that one too. Jesus. We ought to turn this into a trivia quiz. I'll bet you don't know, however, that G8 and his Battle Aces was entirely written by one man, Robert J. Hogan. But they know Hogan, too. The magazine, I think, was bi-monthly. Was it? Yes. And if so, every couple of months, Hogan would come into the office with this enormous pile of manuscript entirely written by himself. He had written the lead novel, the short stories, the departments, the letters to the editor. And it was all incredibly bad. So some copy editor slaving away for 25 or 30 bucks a week would have to go through this stuff. And this task was rotated because it was thought that it was not fair to make anybody do it twice in a row. The one time that I had to do it, I swear this is true, the plot of the lead novel involved a project by German scientists. This was a World War I story. German scientists to make their soldiers very strong and fierce by injecting them with rhinoceros juice. I swear. I was not able to edit G8 and his Battle Aces the way they wanted it done because I was too cautious. But they showed me a manuscript of his that Fred Pohl had edited before me. And again, I swear this is true. What Fred had done was to cross out every line that Robert J. Hogan had written and write in something else. Shortly thereafter, G8 and his Battle Aces went down the tube. And the next thing Robert J. Hogan did was to write an air war story and sell it to the Saturday Evening Post. Figure that out. All this time, I was trying to write and trying to make drawings, illustrations. Don't look at my illustrations, they're awful. And I began to realize that you can't just create these other worlds that I wanted to get into by blowing balloons or by smoking pot or whatever. It's like bricklaying. It's technique. It's very hard to learn. And I was learning a little bit by working at Popular and also another $25 a week job as a reader at the Scott Meredith Literary Agency. For Scott Meredith. And eventually, my stories got a little less crude. Began selling them here and there. And what in the world I wanted to tell you about that I've forgotten. But anyway, years went by, and I was living in Milford, Pennsylvania, where at that time Jim and Judy Blish and Judy Merrill were also living. And it occurred to us that it might be a nice idea to put Milford on the map by organizing a writers' conference there. So we did that, and a lot of people came out, and it became an annual event, which some people wished we wouldn't do because I think they disliked the whole idea of talking about science fiction. I don't know. Anyway, one evening, this is a Harlan Ellison story coming up. One evening, we were sitting around in the living room of our gigantic Victorian mansion in Milford. This is true. It was a gigantic Victorian mansion. We got it for a song because it was a white elephant. It cost us, even then, this was in the 50s, 50s, 60s, cost us $1,200 a year to heat that monster. It was just awful. But it was a beautiful place. And we had a 30-foot living room. The ceilings were 12 feet high. And along one wall of the living room ran a staircase with a little landing which formed a sort of balcony. And Harlan was bored. He'd read all the manuscripts, so he was leaping up and grabbing the rails of this balcony and pulling himself up, climbing over the rail, and coming down the stairs, and leaping up and climbing over and doing it again. And Katie was right here trying to read manuscripts and began to annoy her. So she finally told Harlan that her 9-year-old son, Dickie, could do it one-handed. And Harlan spent half an hour trying before he gave up and said he didn't see how Dickie did that. After we'd been doing these Milford conferences for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years, a guy named Robin Scott Wilson showed up one year. And he told us frankly that he had been in the CIA, but we figured anybody could make one mistake. So we said, all right, come on. And he showed up. He was a kind of a muscular, crew-cut guy. And we began to be a little uneasy about him because we discovered that every time we turned around, he was behind us, listening and making notes. At the end of the week, he revealed what his real purpose was. After leaving the CIA, he had taken a job teaching English in a place called Clarion Teachers College in Clarion, Pennsylvania, which I'll tell you more about that. And he was doing a summer project, which was to be a writing workshop. And he had come to Milford to find out how we did it and to pick out his visiting lecturers for the first year. So off we went to Clarion, Katie and I and Judy Merrill and a couple of other people. Now, Clarion, Pennsylvania is in the upper left-hand corner of the state. And that is far back in the boonies. I want to tell you, let me give you a couple of illustrations. I'll start with the college cafeteria. Now, you know what cafeteria food is like. But let me tell you that in the Clarion College cafeteria, they are able to spoil a toasted cheese sandwich. I couldn't hear. So we looked around for other sources of food in the community, and we tried everything. We heard there was a place where the truck drivers ate 30 miles away. We went there. Yuck. The biggest eating establishment in town was the hotel dining room. And Katie and I went in there one day, and there was stuffed crab on the menu, and we asked the waitress, what is it stuffed with? And she said, I don't know, but I wouldn't eat it. This is all true. One year, Gardner Dozwa came to Clarion. He was not invited exactly, or he wasn't a lecturer or anything. He just came. And his purpose was to liven us up a little bit, which he did in various ways, some of which I'm not going to tell you about. One day, one afternoon, Katie and I and some of the students were standing on the porch of one of the dorms. These were old, falling down dorms. They were condemned, had cracks in the walls, but they were marvelous because they had high ceilings, and they had these porches where we could play games and stand around. And as we stood there, we heard a chanting in the distance. And it was the chant of the monkey soldiers in The Wizard of Oz. Yo-ho, yo-ho. And down the hill came this procession, headed by Gardner, carrying a virgin who had a candle in her navel. And they brought her to the steps of the dorm and deposited her there, and Gardner haggled at her heart with a table knife, and it was all over. But during this whole proceeding, the president of the college had been standing on his balcony next door watching. Now, Robin Wilson had not been present, but he heard about it immediately, and he came running over, and he said to Katie, is it really true that she had a candle in her thingy? And Katie said, yes, but it wasn't lit. And Robin said, I have a note here that says grasshopper. What do you think I meant by that? Oh, I know. I wanted to tell you that there are two kinds of people, the ants and the grasshoppers, and I'm a grasshopper. And I have always felt that things would go along more or less smoothly if I just let them alone. And I've never worried much about money. And this was the sort of thing they tried to beat out of me in Hood River, because they said, go to college, learn a trade, become a banker or a lawyer or a dentist or something, and I said no. And I went back to Hood River a few years ago, and there were all these ants still there. And I've had a jolly time all over the landscape. And it just seems to me, as I look out on your smiling faces, that I'm living in one of those fantasy worlds that I was trying to get into when I was a kid. I could give you a list as long as your arm, I suppose, of just absolutely fantastic things that have happened. Think of L. Ron Hubbard being the head of the church, for example. So I'm quite content with the way things have turned out, and I thank you.
Well, now you know what it's like to do a guest of honor speech at a Worldcon. Fun, nothing to it. I did one about 10 years ago. I was not one of those who was made to wait well beyond my time. In fact, they may have caught me a couple of years before my time. And as Damon was making his speech, I was thinking about mine and wondering what the hell I said. It was 10 years ago, and I can't remember a word of it, which means that I might someday give it all again under the 50 million monkeys principle and just run through it all unknowing while some smartass out there saying, oh, you said all of that in Heidelberg in 1970. For example, I heard Damon do the Meteor of Men of Pla thing at some convention 10 or 15 years ago, and I was going right along with it, point by point. He did it better this time, but he did leave out one important datum, which the founder of the Science Fiction Writers of America should not have left out. Credit where credit is due. The author of Meteor Men of Pla, who is sitting right over there, is Henry J. Kostkos. Does my heart good to hear Henry J. Kostkos get a bigger round of applause than Damon Knight. It's taken 15 years, but he got even. Anyway, all right, now comes the tough one. We got another guest of honor here. And not only is it hard to be sassy about Kate Wilhelm, it's politically dangerous. I mean, you heard me already say Leslie Turek, chairman of the convention. If I start doing something to Kate, anything might happen to me at the feminist panel tomorrow. So I'll play it safe. I will not tell you about her early and stormy marriage to Harlan Ellison. Or the affair with Henry J. Kostkos that followed. I will guard her privacy as best I can. I will not tell you about the bribing of editors in the early 50s, or any of the seamy anecdotes that I could, if I had the courage, bring forth about the person that this committee, in its infinite wisdom, chose to be co-guest of honor. No, I will plunge right in with the nicer side of Kate Wilhelm. Actually, Kate Wilhelm is a great surprise to me. I mean, here, sanctified as guest of honor. So she and I wrote for the same cruddy little magazine about 20 years ago at 1/4 cent a word on publication. It was a good, cruddy little magazine, incidentally, and if Robert A.W. Lowndes, bless his soul, is somewhere out there, he knows what a warm feeling I had and still have for that funny little magazine, but it didn't pay very much money. And there I was 12 years old and happy to be getting published. And there was Kate contributing stories, too, out of somewhere Kentucky, Hood River, Kentucky, I think. And I read the stories, and I said they're pretty good, but I figured anybody who is selling stories to this magazine that I'm selling stories to really isn't going to go anywhere. I was wrong, happy to say, about both of us. The magazine, which was a wondrous thing, went away. Kate stayed, got better and better. She does not stand up and tell scurrilous stories about other people when a microphone is put before her. She does not write diabolical book reviews. There is very little of the killer about the overt Kate Wilhelm. Yet, even as Damon, you think I'm going to say something snotty now, don't you? You know, Terry Carr said I'd be wearing sandals when I came up here. I'm damned if I'm going to be predictable. Look. That's a shoe, and I may show you the other leg later. No, I'm not going to say anything snotty about Kate. I'm going to say that even as Damon, through acts of terror, became the conscience of science fiction, Kate, through implicit acts of writing, served the same function. Kate, quietly writing her stories, quietly getting better and better, quietly telling quiet, irresistible stories in quiet, flawless prose, served as a model for those who had the sense to study. And that is why Kate Wilhelm is our other guest of honor tonight. Kate?
Thank you, Bob. Unlike Bob and Damon, I'm not about to get up here and wing it. There's no way I would do that. I have a speech written. And if I begin to forget it, I'm frankly going to read the whole thing. I just want to warn you. The reason Bob didn't get snotty was that we told him if he said really bad things about Damon, I'd hit him. If he said really bad things about me, Damon would hit him. He was outnumbered from the beginning. The title of the speech I wrote out for tonight is The Uncertain Edge of Reality. And I stewed about this speech for 6 months. What would I talk about? Because everyone out there knows more about science fiction than I do. You know, who wrote things and when they wrote them, all of that. And I thought, well, I can't do that. I can't compete with Bob. I can't compete with Damon in the whole area of the history of science fiction. So as I usually do, I just went off on my own road and said, well, I'll talk about reality. This weekend, of course, is going to demonstrate really how uncertain the edge of reality is. I think it's appropriate to talk about reality to science fiction people. With the general audience, you just have to explain everything. You know, they don't know, if you say reality, you have to start there. And every other concept that we talk about and take for granted, you have to explain. So I don't think I would dare to try this speech any place but right here tonight. And it won't be given again in 10 years or 15 years because it's written, and it will be filed away. So it seems that recently a lot of people are saying science fiction is reality fiction, and sometimes they say it's the only reality fiction. And sometimes I even use that phrase myself. But I don't think I mean what other people mean by it. And before we get on into the rest of the speech, I want to talk about what other people seem to mean. A lot of people seem to think that reality fiction, science fiction, is problem-solving fiction. And that's supposing you have a sanitary engineer for your protagonist. And the problem is that in a future city, the sewer system has clogged up. And his problem is to unclog it. It's future, so it's science fiction. Clogged up sewer is serious, so it's reality fiction. And it's even rather grim. And a lot of people who think along these lines think the grimmer it is, the closer it is to reality. And so that satisfies them as reality fiction. And I have to say right now, that isn't what I mean. I think of that as how-to fiction. It's how to build a space station, how to conquer the aliens, how to unclog a sewer system, and so on. And in all of these, the author already knows the answer before a word is put on paper. The author knows the entire reality of the fictional world. And the author is kind of like God, going to give you a lesson masquerading as fiction. And I have too few answers to let that be my kind of reality fiction. There's another way it's used, and that's by people who say reality fiction is about us here and now. And this doesn't satisfy me either, because I think all good fiction is about us here and now. Sometimes the here and now is changed, it's inverted. Sometimes our culture is taken to another world, and sometimes strange things are done to it. But if you're really looking, you'll find us, and you'll find our culture in good fiction. And that's really saying that good fiction is reality fiction. And that's really nice, especially for people who say, I write reality fiction. But that's not very informative, and that's not what I mean again. When I use it for, people say, why do you write what you write? And I sometimes say, but I don't usually, well, I'm writing about reality. I think reality fiction is like mystery fiction and nurse fiction and Western fiction. It's self-defining. When I use the phrase, I mean fiction about reality. And of course, this leads to all kinds of problems because everyone thinks we all know what reality is, and I don't think anybody knows. That's the very premise that I'm asking questions about. I'm going to give you an example. If you don't believe in water dowsing, you've drawn a little bit of a line between your reality and your fantasy. If you believe in water dowsing, but you don't believe in map dowsing, then your line is a different one. If you don't believe in either of them, then your line is still different. And so everyone on that one little tiny problem has probably a different line separating reality from fantasy. And it's no good for somebody who's a believer to say, I can prove you're wrong, because all you can ever do is prove it to your own satisfaction. You can't prove it to someone else's. And the other person can turn right around just as easily and prove that you're wrong for not believing. And it's really no good to say, let's ask experts. Let's ask the geologists, because they're just as divided on this as the rest of us are. As Damon mentioned, we both live in Oregon, and right now there's a more than passing interest in volcanoes. I imagine you're all aware that we have lots of exciting terrain around us. I know back here the interest is a lot simpler, and the volcano is something remote and exotic and kind of fun. But we think of it as a near neighbor that's run amok. And we don't know if the ash is going to come our way or not from day to day. But yet we have so many words that express stability and use earth terms. You think of them: terra firma, solid ground, steady as a rock, granite-faced, immovable as a rock. When I was thinking about the volcano, I began to wonder what words the Indians in the Northwest use to express stability. I don't think they're ours. I don't think they're at all the same. There are a lot of Indian legends about the Northwest. Of course, there are throughout the whole country. But out there, they tell about the terrible chiefs of the underworld and chiefs of the air, who got in fights, hurled boulders at each other, blazing. They turned the day into night with ash and dust, smoke. They tell about the two warriors who fought for the love of a beautiful maiden. In their terrible fight, they hurled the boulders, the ground shook, a natural bridge fell down, the whole countryside was devastated, until the Great Spirit finally got tired of all of this, and he silenced them both and turned them into silent warriors of the Columbia. And they stand there now. We call them Mount Hood and Mount Adams. And the prize they fought for was the beautiful Mount St. Helens. Transformed her into this beautiful maiden. Her beauty was praised by everyone who saw her. Beautiful, symmetrical form, cloaked in white. If we wanted to add another chapter to this whole legend, we could go on from there and say the beautiful maiden stood there waiting for her love to come and claim her. She stood steadfast through the summer heat, the winter rains, the driving snows, but still no lover came. You see, this is a very sad story. Until finally a terrible fear started in her heart, and still no lover came to claim her, and she knew that the two warriors had fought for her. One must have won. But finally, she gave up. With the death of the love, her magic failed. And then with a terrible voice that echoed over the land, she threw off her virginal robe. And the sorrow of the maiden became the fury of the hag. So she hurled ash and fire out over the land, burned the forest, scoured the land, and fouled the waters. That's how the Indians would have told what happened just this spring. And so they stand there, the two warriors silently guarding the river they followed. And the ancient hag revealed again, as she really is, trembling and breathing sulfur, cursing the land. And deep within, she's stirring her cauldron again. The last chapter isn't written. Our words for this are magma, magmatic vents and plugs, caldera, pyroclastic flows, harmonic tremors, ash plumes. There's a whole new vocabulary that we've all learned this spring to talk about those same events. Every age has its adepts who understand and predict and try to control their environment. The priests, shamans, and sorcerers and scientists. They're all trying to do the same thing, as to make understandable those mysterious and frightening events and to make them fit into an overall scheme of reality. We know that the priests and the shamans and the sorcerers use magic and superstition and revelations for their insights, and these all failed. And the scientists based their findings on fact and experiential evidence. In the case of Mount St. Helens, on that Sunday that it erupted, at 10 o'clock in the morning, a group of people was due to arrive at Spirit Lake. That's high on the mountainside. The Indians haven't gone up there in generations. They knew that was not a good place. The Indians refused it, and the white people, of course, built their summer houses there. They had all been evacuated, and on this Sunday they were going back up there to get their belongings, to water their house plants, whatever people have to do when they've been displaced. And the United States Geologic Survey scientists said that they would have a 2-hour period to do this after the first warning of a major eruption. That morning, in less than 2 hours from the time they were supposed to arrive, the mountain erupted. They had a 2-minute warning. None of these people were up there. But if they had left just a little bit earlier, they would have been caught. Everyone, the scientists and the people themselves, everyone was very surprised that day because the mountain erupted without the predicted warning. And we've all been surprised many, many times since then by that mountain. And in fact, in July, Mount Hood started to rumble, and within a week's period there were 90 earthquakes. And no one has said yet if Mount Hood is going to erupt, or as the Indians might phrase it, if Mount Hood is stirring after a long sleep. To go back a minute to the natural bridge that fell, it was called the Bridge of the Gods, and its very existence is questioned. The geologists line up on both sides. Each faction proves its own case. Among the Indians, it was known that there was no salmon fishing beyond the point of the bridge and a high waterfall that separated the upper and lower Columbia River there. The Indians met at a trading post, and the salmon fishermen traded with the high plateau Indians. Salmon was the chief item of barter. It was highly prized. But these are Indian legends, and geologists can't accept those as evidence, and they can't accept this as history. Oral history doesn't count. And the geologic evidence lends itself to two distinct interpretations. There was a bridge, there was not a bridge. The same kind of split goes right through the sciences, every single one of them. Jokes are made about opposing psychiatrists appearing in court to prove the same person sane and insane. Handwriting analysts get into the same kind of battle. Meteorology is divided between those who think we've entered a new ice age and those who think we're in a warming trend. Archaeologists date Machu Picchu back to the time of the Spanish conquest or back to 7000 BC. And archaeologists and anthropologists put Indians in North America about 11,000 years ago, or all the way back to 30,000 years ago. In medicine, iatrogenic illnesses account for about 1/3 of all hospitalizations, and iatrogenic means medicine-caused. But people say, well, these aren't hard sciences. What about chemistry? And of course, there are funny things in chemistry, too. It was known right up until about the middle of the 19th century that glycerin wouldn't crystallize. Everybody interested in glycerin had tried. No one had succeeded. And then one day, a shipment of glycerin on its way from Berlin to England arrived there intact. When it was opened, it was found that the glycerin had crystallized en route. And funnier still, it's reported that glycerin in flasks on shelves also crystallized at the same time. And since then, there's been no problem with it. And of course, chemists are really in opposition about the effects of insecticides and defoliants, additives to food and additives to materials that go into clothing. The last I read about a chemist convention, there were almost fistfights in the hall over things like that. It's really tempting to assume that those who don't agree with whatever your particular beliefs are, gung-ho for banning Agent Orange, for example, are in the grasp of evil corporations. And I expect some of them are. But it's also true that there are differences of opinion. The same evidence leads to different opinions, different conclusions. In biology, the argument over nature versus nurture is stronger than it ever was in the past. Some people are saying now that the gene is immortal. Different combinations are passed out, but the gene itself goes on forever. It's immortal. And there are other people who believe that all behavior can be traced directly to the genes. And what this means is that because nobody is responsible for the combinations of genes that you receive at conception, nobody's responsible for behavior. And that's kind of comforting, too. What really can't be accounted for, genetically anyway, is culture and religion and altruism and a whole lot of other kinds of activities that are sometimes counterproductive genetically. There's never been a gene for lifelong celibacy passed on to an offspring, for example. So there's a many branching chasm in the area of biology and ethology and social biology. Those people are all climbing cliffs and yelling across the abyss at each other. Each group is certain that it has the key to the riddle of human behavior. Each one positive. This is the answer if they would just listen to me. And the kinds of theories they're screaming about are territorial imperative, innate aggression, a ghost in the machine, that's a split between the old and the new brain, bicameral brain, that's a split between the left and right hemispheres, cytology, molecular biology, the list goes on. It's true that without enthusiasm and without faith in your work, the work doesn't advance, and that's especially true about scientific work, I think. It's true of all creative work. But it's also true that an observer has to be free to point out that opposing theories can't both be right. Science has made many mistakes in the past. It's not immune from making mistakes now and in the future. And it needs its critics, just as any artistic group does. And it's always good if the critic is also sympathetic and well aware of the really, truly great accomplishments science has made, as well as the groups. It's up to the critic to point out that when you come to a fork in the road, a decision has to be made. If A, then not B. It's that simple. And since we're all pulled down that same road, it would be good to know on what basis those decisions are made and who is making them. Today's scientists are the equivalent of yesterday's shamans in that they point the way and the rest of the populace follows. And I think it's always good to keep in mind that they're human, with the same divisions that the rest of us have, and the same uncertain edge of reality that we all share. And it really matters. These differences between the experts are very important to us, all of us. Eventually, the current disputed ideas find wide acceptance and become part of an ever-emerging conventional wisdom. But acceptance doesn't mean, necessarily, that those ideas accepted are truer reflections of reality than those that aren't accepted. Sometimes it means they're more convenient. But it does mean they become self-perpetuating. And there's an idea for idea, there's a name for ideas that become self-perpetuating the way genes do, really, in that they replicate themselves for hundreds or even thousands of years. They're called memes. I really think that's neat. Moses and the Red Sea is such an idea. Plato's Atlantis is another one. Aladdin and his wonderful lamp. A whole lot of what Aristotle wrote. People really don't believe in it much, but it's still alive. It's still perpetuating itself. And I think it would be a terrible mistake to think that people did this in the past, but they aren't doing it anymore. I think we're all accepting all kinds of ideas, information, without proof, just as people always have. No one's proven to my satisfaction that UFOs are anything except what the name says, unidentified flying objects. And yet out there are so many people whose perceptions of reality have been altered by the idea of UFOs. There's so many ideas that have really changed people. And how many people believe and have had twists in their reality to accommodate those beliefs in the chariots of the gods? And how many people believed during Hitler's Germany that there's a natural superiority in the white North European Aryan? See, it matters, because what you believe shapes the reality you experience and the way you behave. Subjective experience is always difficult, maybe impossible, to assess. No one can prove that it's possible really to assess it. And it's well known how psychological factors can influence expectations and bring about certain behavior. Self-fulfilling prophecies are really too well known to go into. We all have read about those. Sometimes people will accept a twist in reality without asking for a scrap of evidence, denying their own experiences, in fact, and changing the way they live, just in a twinkling. A very minor example of how that happened took place a few years ago when Johnny Carson made a joke about a pending shortage of toilet paper. The public instantly made it true, and there was terrible hoarding. People didn't have room to store it, in fact. So you can see why science takes a dim view of subjective feelings and eyewitness accounts. Science wants and needs controllable experiments, but the real world isn't a laboratory, and real people do strange and unpredictable and sometimes even wonderful things. Science subdivides reality into smaller and smaller units the way a physicist subdivides the atom, until you really wonder how they can sell pieces so small. I keep waiting for the announcement of yet a new particle with no mass and no charge and no duration and no effects. And this is one way to look at reality, if you divide it into small enough pieces that you can handle them. But there does come a time when you have to say, is this new piece of reality an artifact? And you can go from there and say, is all reality an artifact? I want to tell you some of the things that different people believed in different times. Some of them are still believed today, I think. Stones can't fall from the sky. If you look at the sky, you see there's water up there. That's what the blue is. And we all know water comes down. Stones can't fall from the sky. It's only when an unqualified observer is around that they fall. The rest of them get thrown from the garage roof or the barn roof or roll down the hill. Night vapors cause malaria. Close the windows at dusk. Close the doors. Stay inside. You won't catch malaria. You probably wouldn't. If that hadn't changed, we wouldn't have drive-in movies. Royalty exists through divinity. It's God's will that this man be king or this woman be queen. It's part of God's inscrutable plan that you were born to your status and they were born to theirs. And to try to change it is heresy. Here's my favorite. A red-haired woman in the kitchen will keep butter from forming in the churn. There are a whole lot of food beliefs, and probably you know more than I do. Eating fruit and drinking milk at the same time will give you a stomachache. Tomatoes are poison. Green beans have to be cooked 2 hours or you'll get worms. There are whole books filled with lists like that, and they're all fun. But there's nothing so ridiculous and implausible and easy to disprove that somebody isn't going to accept as a true reflection of reality. Somebody's going to believe it. Just imagine how the red-haired woman's story came about. Sometimes butter just doesn't form. It's the wrong butter fat, the wrong temperature, the milk is too old or too young, or something's wrong. But on this day, a red-haired woman walked through the kitchen. And she was instantly suspect. You have to say, why? Were red-haired women so scarce that this is the first time one had ever turned up in a kitchen? Where did she come from? Was she a foreigner? But why would anyone else accept that? You can imagine the scene, the wife saying, but dear, the butter didn't come, you have to drink buttermilk. And the father saying, you say a red-haired woman did it? Well, keep her out of here. And just like that, instant acceptance. And it really isn't fair to criticize, because we're also desperate for some kind of reality, something to believe in, to account for the world that's truly mysterious. We'll accept that, and we'll accept other equally weird stories if they seem to offer an explanation for whatever is worrying us. And we all do it. But scientists are much tougher. They can always dismiss ridiculous beliefs, and sometimes true beliefs of others, by calling the observers incompetent. The incompetent observer is an eyewitness who reports something that contradicts an accepted theory. All those who said stones fall from the sky, for example, they were incompetent. An incompetent observer is a non-scientist reporting on scientific concerns. The geologist can't accept the Indian legends because they're, after all, incompetent. The people in New England who are studying megalithic structures, very much like those in Europe, are incompetent amateurs because the archaeologists know there were no megalithic people in the New World. A scientist studying and reporting in an area that is not his or her specialty is incompetent. Linus Pauling has no business talking about vitamin C because obviously in that area he's incompetent. But even the scientists who report within their own fields in a manner that's not acceptable suddenly become incompetent. Any scientist who reports a new discovery on a late-night talk show or in a popular book or magazine has reported something false, obviously, because a real scientist wouldn't report a real finding in that manner. Homo sapiens sapiens, that's us, has been around and thriving for about 40,000 years. If the biography of our ancestors took a 300-page book to write, we'd be the last short paragraph. And yet we've affected this earth in more ways and have changed it more than any other life form that ever walked on it. Our first true ancestors really couldn't be told apart from Neanderthals. They all lived in caves and ate whatever they could find. But then the really, truly great discontinuity came about that changed everything. This was language. And in a twinkling, civilizations arose and cultures formed, and they dissolved and reformed over and over. We and our ancestors have been trying all that time to find a real reality. We've been trying different reality systems over and over. We're still doing it. We build mountains of information and data, and we stand on that mountain to observe the world. And we tend to think that this is the only place that you can stand to see the real world. We don't see that the mountain is one of a chain, that we're surrounded by other eroded mountains. We don't seem to realize the ground is uneasy underneath us, because mountain building is a continuing activity. What we do is accept reality by consensus, and reality by compromise. And that's just what every other culture has ever done, from the Australian Bushmen to the Amazon Indians. Reality by compromise. One of the Amazon tribes, it's a really very successful tribe. They had no hunger and no sickness. They had lots of plantings, and there was plenty of game there. And yet when they were confronted by the white people, they went into such an immediate collapse that for 2 years they planted absolutely nothing. And they would have died if they hadn't been fed. The loss of reality was such a shock to them that psychologically they did die. They had to be reborn as something else and something less than what they had been before. That's one of the ways it can change, but there are other ways. I like to, of course, because I do write, I like to see things in other terms. And I was imagining reality as the surface of a pond. And it's a pond that we've dug, and our ancestors have dug, and we filled with water, and it's ours. It belongs to us. We made it. And we can drop questions into it, just like throwing pebbles into a pond. Eventually, so slowly that no one even notices, the pond is filled, and the water overflows. It simply flows down the slope and makes a new pond somewhere else, and that's a new reality. And this doesn't happen overnight. This takes time. And this is what happens when we accept new scientific theories sometimes. But if what we have now is the ultimate reality, then the universe really is absurd. We, Homo sapiens sapiens, or Homo sap sap for short, we've made it. And we can change it. It's absurd and tragic and illogical and irrational for us to waste the finite resources of this earth on armaments races. And it's absurd and tragic for us, in the reality we've made, to deny equal rights to all adults. It's really absurd and tragic to accept as natural the terrible social injustices that endure, the racism and sexism, famine, malnutrition, pollution, illiteracy. We accept it. Our reality is failing us, and we'd better question it now. I think we're on a dead-end track just as surely as the dinosaur was, and just as surely as the saber-toothed tiger was. But there is a big difference. They were helpless. They were at the mercy of their genes. They were caught in that slow evolution to extinction. And we have the enormous advantage of being able to externalize power and externalize our weapons. It isn't our genes building MX missile complexes, and it isn't our genes building neutron bombs. It isn't our genes building bureaucracies, diverting basic resources and brain power from the real problems of the world. This isn't our genes forcing us. These things are all the products of the reality we have made and accepted. We can change it. What's perhaps most absurd, and maybe offers an explanation for why we got on this suicide track and why we're not getting off again, is that we don't know who we are. We don't know what we are. A third of our lives is spent in unconsciousness, sleep. We don't know why. There have been theories, and there'll be more theories, but we don't know any more than Plato did when he said why. We don't know. We know that children learn about fire when they're really young. Fire burns. And yet throughout history, there have been people who walk on fire and don't burn. Why does this happen? How does this happen? Unless all of the observers were truly incompetent, it really happens. We don't know how and why. Almost everyone has a story about synchronicity. Those times when a real object appears that was the subject of a discussion, for example. And Damon mentioned the house that we lived in Milford, and it really was a Charles Adams house with the 3 stories and the cavernous basements. We were watching the Halloween Star Trek show one night, the one that Bob Bach wrote about vampires and witches, and a real bat flew through the room. So everyone stopped watching television, chased the bat, and put it outside. Never did find out how the show ended. I assume the bat got away, ours did. And most people get a phone call from someone they were thinking about but weren't expecting to hear from, or they get a letter, or they get a visit or something. This happens so often that we just take it for granted anymore. And most of these are so minor that most people shrug them off and tend to forget them. We lump them all together and call them coincidence. And we pretend that because we've given them a name, we understand them. And that's a lot of nonsense. We can try to explain how an entire symphony can spring to life in the mind of a composer in an instant. How a scientist can have an elegant solution to a problem in an instant. How a novel can suddenly exist, needing only to be written down. It's there. Every bit of it's there. It came in an instant. We can try to explain those things, but it always sounds very hollow. We can talk about the intricacy of the mind and call it a high-speed computer with millions of cross connections, all of this. And it changes as the fashions change. It might be a hologram one day, a computer another day, or something else. It used to be a clock, a mechanical clock. These are all hollow explanations. Nobody knows. We don't even know exactly what we mean when we say the mind. There's a lot of argument about that. But there is the whole range of ESP effects that almost everybody has had some experience with. They have no place in our reality. To deny them because they're unpredictable and uncontrollable seems a little arbitrary. To deny them because they don't fit into an orderly universe Makes me question if our containers are the wrong shape or too small. Maybe we have the wrong theories. Our reality forces us to deny our own experiences again and again, to label them as unreal, to be embarrassed by them and try to forget them. Our reality might work with mechanical people, but we're not mechanical people. We're unpredictable. We sometimes know things we have no way of knowing. We sometimes show powers we have no business having. Under hypnosis and stress, we can sometimes be super people, and this is well known and denied. Our reality is about as restricting as the ancient Chinese foot bindings, but we accept it, and we hobble about and try to forget those moments when we flew. Why? So people ask me every once in a while, why do you write those funny things that you write? And it's because I'm interested in this. This is really my subject matter. I'm asking, what do we mean by reality? And are we stuck with the reality we have? And if we are, why are we? And this is what I mean by reality fiction. Science fiction, of course, is what I write. It's reality fiction. Science fiction is Star Wars and the gore of gore and dragons and all the rest of that. But it can be something else, too. That's one of the good things about it. It can be those things and something else. It can include me. And I'm glad, because I don't know who else would publish what I write. I think it can be visionary. And I don't mean that in the way that people use it, the cross-eyed mystic looking into a dim future at some unreachable utopia. That's not what I mean. I think it can be visionary in that it can look at us and say, why are we here? Why are we accepting this? Why is this good enough? If it isn't good enough, why don't we change it? Sometimes, of course, in science fiction, when we look at the here and now, we have to take it somewhere else. But first you have to look at the here and now, or you don't know what you want to move. And there are writers who look out at the world and find it perfectly wonderful. They find it acceptable. Nothing needs to be changed except it has to be future. And they think it's the highest accomplishment that we can possibly make. They're usually male. And But there are a whole lot of others who are going to look out there and say it's absurd and it's tragic and it's crazy and it's irrational and it's illogical, and why are we putting up with it? And I don't think we should. I think we ought to change it. I'm going to use the metaphor of the pond one more time. I'm just going to say that it's my intention to ripple the surface. I want to disturb it and to question it. I'm throwing my pebbles in there, my questions in there very deliberately. It's not accidental. I don't think we made our reality big enough. It's not deep enough. It's not wide enough. It doesn't hold enough. There's too much of us that we've left out. And unless we're all in, it is the wrong reality for people. It isn't ours. It's a mechanical person's reality. It's the machine works reality. It isn't a human reality. All of you can question it just exactly like every writer can. All you have to do is pick on one of the aspects of reality and say, why about it? Register for the draft, why? Who are we going to fight, and why? How good is our cause going to look in 100 years, or 5 years? What kind of reality is it that says every generation has to fight a war? Why is that? I think those are valid questions. I think they should be asked. There was probably a day when the fate of the saber-toothed tiger depended on the generation born that year. A trained zoologist could have looked at the baby saber-toothed tigers, shedding their milk teeth and growing their saber teeth, and he would have known what was about to happen. Of course, the tigers didn't know. We look at their fossils and we think how sad. They were betrayed by 1/8 of an inch more tooth. Poor things. They couldn't have prevented it if they had known. But I think we can know. We can know that we are betraying ourselves. And I think we deserve better. We don't deserve that. We have the wisdom of hindsight, and we also have the magic of foresight. We can, if we'll just admit it. We can do truly magnificent things on this earth. We can make it into a great earth. But first we have to admit that we're capable. And second, we have to admit We can't do it in the reality we have accepted. I'm going to keep throwing my pebbles. I hope you will, too. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Now, don't run away yet. We're not quite through. We have some announcements. We have some ceremonies. For example, the Noreascon 1 bidding party is open to the entire convention tonight in room 3151 in the East Tower. I think you should attend. I think when 1971 comes around again, we should let them do it all over again. The Henry J. Costco's autograph session. Has been moved to Copley Plaza tomorrow at noon. And we have here, as a tangible token, a couple of what I once called flat Yugos in an inspired moment at the last Boston Worldcon. This little trophy says Professional Guest of Honor, Kate Wilhelm, Noreascon 2, Boston, August 29th, September 1st, 1980. And, thankfully, this one says, Professional Guest of Honor, Damon, Noreascon 2, etc., etc. Thank you all. Good night.